My name is Hannah Reed, and I'm 34 years old. Last April, I sent one photograph to my family's group chat. My 7-year-old daughter, pale as the pillow under her head, hours after open-heart surgery. Beneath it, I typed, "She wants to see you." My brother answered first, "Busy. Handle it." Then my mom. "She lived. Stop making her our problem." 14 people were in that chat. Not one of the others said a word. I wrote back, "It's okay." Set the phone face down on her blanket and went and cried in the stairwell where my daughter couldn't hear me. 3 months later, at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in July, my mother and my brother dropped their phones at the same moment, in 2 different rooms, on 2 different sides of town. Before I tell you what was on the news that night, you need to hear what my family had been doing with my daughter's heart while I sat alone in that hospital, because those 2 texts were not the worst of it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally say the things that took years to say, and families learn what presence actually means. If stories like this tend to find you at the right time, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now let me take you back to February, when a routine checkup ended with a cardiologist quietly closing the door behind her. Some background, so the rest of this makes sense. I'm a staff accountant at a small firm in Dayton, Ohio. I balance other people's books for a living, which means I know what a lie looks like in a ledger. I rent a 2-bedroom house on the east side with my daughter, Grace. She's 7, funny in a quiet way, and she draws our family in crayon whether they've earned it or not. She was born with a heart defect that surgeons patched when she was a baby, and she calls the scar down her chest her zipper. She says it like it's a jacket feature. My mother, Linda, lives 20 minutes across town in the house we grew up in, the one with the flag out front and the church directory by the phone. My brother, Derek, is 38, sells real estate in the northern suburbs, and smiles down at traffic from a billboard on Route 4. His teeth photograph well. Our dad died 9 years ago. Heart trouble runs in this family. So does our way of handling it, which is to make sure the neighbors see us handling it. I raised myself into this job starting at 19, paid my own tuition one night class at a time, and learned early that in our house love was a bill you paid by never needing anything. I was the daughter who handled things. Derek was the son who announced things. My mother managed the difference. For 34 years that arrangement held, mostly because whenever it cut me, I said the only thing I was raised to say, "It's okay." By the end of February, that arrangement, and both of the hearts in this family, the real one and the painted one, was about to be tested. The last week of February, Grace went in for her regular cardiology checkup. Routine, the kind I'd sat through a dozen times with a magazine I never read. Except this time, the echo took too long, and the tech stopped chatting, and Dr. Okafor came in and closed the door behind her with a softness I felt in my spine. The valve they'd repaired when Grace was a baby was failing, faster than anyone had projected. She used calm words, regurgitation, enlargement, surgical window, and then one sentence with no calm in it at all. "We shouldn't wait past spring. Open heart surgery. A valve repair at a children's hospital in Cincinnati, 90 minutes south, sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks." I did what I always do when the floor moves. I made a list. I called the insurance company from the parking garage and stayed on hold long enough to memorize the music. I asked about out-of-pocket maximums and pre-authorization and lodging near the hospital. Then, because some habits outrank sense, I called my mother. I told her that her granddaughter needed her chest opened to stay alive. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear the kitchen clock I grew up under. My mother's first question was not whether Grace was scared, or whether I was, or what the doctors gave for odds. Her first question was, "Have you told anyone yet?" I remember looking at my own reflection in the car window and not understanding the question. I understood it fine within 48 hours. Because by the weekend, without one phone call to me, my daughter's face, school picture, missing tooth, Sunday dress, was on the internet asking strangers for money. The campaign was called Hearts for Grace. Derek built it on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning it had my daughter's school photo, a paragraph about our family's fight, and a fundraising goal with a lot of zeros. He never asked me. He never even told me. I found out when a coworker hugged me in the break room and said she'd donated. My mother shared it to every group she belonged to with the caption, "Prayer warriors, our Gracie needs you." Within a week, it went the kind of viral that small cities do. The local news ran a feel-good segment, and I want you to picture the staging, because it matters later. Derek sat in the interview chair in a blazer the color of trust. My mother sat beside him holding a framed photo of Grace. I was invited to stand behind them, slightly out of frame, like a coat rack that could cry on cue. The reporter, a polished woman named Tess Calloway, asked Derek what the community's support meant to him. He touched his chest and said, "Family is everything to us." The total climbed past $40,000 that night. I'll be honest with you, some part of me was grateful. Surgery is expensive even with insurance, and I've never had the kind of pride that argues with help. What I had instead was an accountant's itch, a small cold spot at the base of my neck, watching the donations pour into a campaign where every dollar routed through one person. Not the hospital, not Grace's mother. The organizer of record, with sole control of withdrawals, Derek Reed. The man who was about to be too busy to visit a recovery room. I want to be clear about something, because I know how these stories get told. I did not sit back and trust the process. In the first week of March, when the hospital asked for a surgical deposit, I emailed Derek, in writing, politely, with the invoice attached, and asked him to either transfer the campaign to me as Grace's guardian or send the deposit directly to the hospital's billing office. I copied my mother. I even included the platform's own instructions for transferring a fundraiser to the beneficiary's family. It's a checkbox. It takes a minute. Derek called instead of writing, which I would learn was a pattern, and said the money was in an account, that there was a process, and that I needed to trust the family. Then he did send money. $2,000. I know the exact figure because he handed it to me in a parking lot as an oversized novelty check, while a photographer from his real estate office took pictures for the campaign page. The caption said, "First disbursement to our brave girl." The comments filled with hearts. Here's what I couldn't do about it. And believe me, I looked. The platform gives organizers control of the funds. I had no legal claim right then short of hiring a lawyer, and I had a daughter being scheduled for open-heart surgery in 5 weeks, a job I couldn't lose, and pre-op appointments in another city. You can't fight a war and pack a hospital bag at the same time, so I did the one thing I had room for. I bought a gray binder, 3-ring, plain as oatmeal, and I started printing everything. Screenshots, dates, that grinning check, accountant habit. It would matter later. They rolled my daughter away from me at 7:26 on the morning of April 14th. She was wearing a surgical cap with cartoon suns on it, and she told the anesthesiologist to be careful with her zipper. I signed the consent forms with a hand I ordered not to shake, and then I sat in a waiting room in Cincinnati for 9 hours and learned the pattern of the floor tiles by heart. 11 tiles between my chair and the coffee machine. I texted the family group chat when she went in. Thumbs up from a cousin. Nothing from my mother. Nothing from Derek. Around noon, a nurse named Bonnie, who had no reason to know my name, brought me a coffee I hadn't asked for and said, "Nobody should count tiles alone." I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything my family ever said to me. At 4:10, I opened my phone to check for news from the operating room, and my thumb landed on social media instead, and that is how I found out where my family was. The Hearts for Grace Gala. A hotel ballroom in Dayton. String lights. A step-and-repeat banner with my daughter's face printed on it a dozen times. My mother in a floor-length dress wearing a satin sash. A sash that read, "Team Grace." Derek in a tuxedo at a podium. The post went up while my daughter was still on the table, and the caption read, "Tonight, we celebrate hope." They had scheduled a party in her honor on the day of her surgery, 90 minutes north, and had not told me and had not come. I sat with that. I sat with it the way you sit with a broken rib. Shallow breaths, no sudden movement. Then the double doors opened and Dr. Okafor came out in her scrub cap, and everything else in the world went quiet, because her face was about to tell me whether I still had a daughter. She made it. The repair held. The numbers looked strong. And Dr. Okafor said the word, successful, while I gripped her forearm like a woman going over a waterfall. They let me into the pediatric ICU that evening. If you've never seen your child after heart surgery, I'll spare you most of it. She was the color of the sheet. There were more wires than blanket. But around 8:30 she surfaced, found my face, and asked the question she'd been saving up under the anesthesia. Did Grandma come? I said. Grandma knew she was safe. Grace nodded, very serious, and said, "Tell her I still have my zipper." So I took one photograph. My girl, pale and small and alive, thumbs up half raised, and I sent it to the family group chat. 14 people, the whole roll call of Reeds. I typed, "She's out, she's okay, she wants to see you." The gala, I knew from the live stream, was just hitting dessert. Derek replied within a minute, "Busy, handle it." My mother's reply came while I was still staring at his. "She lived, stop making her our problem." I stood in that ICU with machines beeping the proof of my daughter's heartbeat, and I read those 2 sentences maybe 30 times. 12 other people saw them. 12 people who had shared the fundraiser, worn the sash, tagged the hashtag. Not one of them typed a thing. I memorized every name on that silence. Then I did what 34 years had trained me to do. I typed, "It's okay," and put the phone away, and walked to the stairwell at the end of the hall, and cried with my fist against my mouth so the sound wouldn't carry to her room. It's okay. My whole life in one small sentence. I want you to remember it, because the next time I said them out loud, there was a camera running. We came home 5 days later to a mailbox that had been busy while we were gone. Hospitals bill in waves like weather. Even decent insurance has a deductible and an out-of-pocket maximum, and ours found its ceiling fast. Add the gas, the parking garage, the lodging in Cincinnati, the 2 weeks I took unpaid to sit in that recovery room, and my careful little spreadsheet put the year's damage at over $11,000. Meanwhile, the Hearts for Grace campaign total sat on the public page for anyone to read. $112,000. I'm an accountant. I did not need a calculator to feel the distance between those numbers. So I wrote to Derek again, formally this time, with the spreadsheet attached, and requested a disbursement to cover Grace's actual medical costs. 3 days of silence, then a bank transfer landed, $3,000, with a memo line that read, "Final. Final." I called him, and for once he picked up, and he explained in his showing a house voice that the rest of the money was earmarked. The family had decided, the family, that committee I was apparently no longer part of, that the remaining funds would be protected and managed properly through something bigger than one hospital bill. "We're building something in her honor, Han," he said. "It's what's best for everyone." I asked him what exactly was bigger than the actual child the strangers had paid for. He said a word I want you to hold on to, the way I had to. He said, "The foundation." Then he had a showing. If you've ever sat alone in a hospital waiting room while your family sent thoughts and prayers from a party, put the word "alone" in the comments. I read every one of them, and I know I'm not the only quiet one in this family of ours who's watching. And subscribe, because what I found out about that foundation is the part nobody believes. It took me 11 days to learn what my brother had built with my daughter's name. It had a logo. It had a bank account. It had everything really except her. The Grace Reed Foundation. I found it the way you find most family secrets now, through a state website and a search bar. Registered in Ohio in early May. Director, Derek Reed. Treasurer, Linda Reed. Mission statement: supporting families facing pediatric cardiac challenges, which is a beautiful sentence about a category of 1, minus the 1. There was already a website with a donate button and a photo of my daughter I had never approved, taken at Easter 2 years ago. There was already an announcement for a second annual Hearts for Grace Gala, which was a bold use of the word annual for an organization younger than the flowers on my porch. And then there was the part I didn't find online. I found it at a red light on Salem Avenue, on the way home from Grace's follow-up appointment. A bus bench. my daughter's face, printed level with the curb, next to the foundation's logo. And next to that, tastefully small, the gold and navy branding of Derek's real estate office. Same fonts, same colors, a matched set. My daughter had become a marketing asset with a scar. From the back seat, Grace looked out the window at herself and asked, in the mild voice she uses for genuinely confusing things, "Mom, why am I on a chair?" I told her some people put pictures where everyone can see them, and she thought about it and said, "But nobody asked me." 7 years old. Nobody asked me. Out of the mouths of babes, the entire case. I drove us home with my hands at 10 and 2 and my jaw aching. And that night I opened the gray binder and started a new tab. I labeled it, in block letters, The Foundation. I decided to do this like an adult, at a table, with the person in charge. My mother still holds Sunday dinner in the house we grew up in, pot roast and folded napkins and Grace before the meal. I waited until the plates were cleared, and then I asked her calmly why there was a foundation with my daughter's name on it that neither Grace nor I had agreed to, and where the $112,000 had gone. My mother did not flinch. My mother has never flinched in my presence. I used to think that was strength. She smoothed the tablecloth with the flat of her hand, the way she irons things when she's deciding what you deserve to hear, and she said, "Sit down, Hannah." I was already sitting. That's a technique. Then she gave me the closest thing to a creed I ever heard from her. "This family runs on its name," she said. "Your father left me nothing else. No pension, no insurance worth burying him with. I fed you both on that name. I will not apologize for keeping it strong." I said a child's hospital bills were not a threat to anybody's name. She looked at me the way you look at a slow student. She said the foundation protected the money, that Derek understood optics, that people give to something permanent, not to one girl's bad year. One girl's bad year. That was my daughter's open-heart surgery, filed under branding. Then she leaned in and delivered the strangest sentence of the whole affair, gently, like advice. "Sign nothing without showing me first." As if I were the one running a con on this family, and not the other way around. Here is where being boring became a superpower. Every night that week, after Grace was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with decaf and the gray binder and did what I do for strangers 40 hours a week. I reconciled. Screenshots of the campaign totals by date. Every public post where Derek or my mother announced a dollar figure. The novelty check. The 2 deposits to me. 2,000, then 3,000, memo final. Against my $11,000 spreadsheet of what the surgery had actually cost our household. Dates, amounts, sources, gaps. Numbers are honest little creatures. You just have to line them up and let them talk. And the number that talked loudest wasn't even mine. At Grace's next cardiology follow-up in Cincinnati, the hospital's family services worker sat with us, Maria Delgado, mid-40s, warm in the way of someone who has seen everything and still shows up. She was helping me with paperwork for the billing office when she mentioned, carefully, the way professionals mention things they're not supposed to care about yet, that the cardiac unit had a family assistance fund. Then she said, "You know, we never did see anything from your family's event." I asked what she meant. She chose her words like she was stepping on river stones. At the gala, the one held during my daughter's surgery, there had been an announcement. A pledge. A big one. Made from the podium. To this very hospital, in Grace's honor. Maria had watched the clip herself. A colleague had sent it around the office, and in the weeks since, the development office had received exactly what I had received from my family in that ICU. Nothing. I drove home 90 minutes with one question keeping time on the wipers. How big was the pledge? Big. The clip was still up on the foundation's page, 41 seconds of my brother at a podium under string lights. Tuxedo, teeth, my daughter's face repeating on the banner behind him like wallpaper. He raises a glass and announces that Hearts for Grace is proud to pledge $25,000 to the Children's Hospital Cardiac Unit, quote, in Grace's honor, unquote. The ballroom stands up. My mother, sash and all, presses her hand to her chest like a woman receiving a medal. 400 people applaud money that, per the hospital's own development office, never arrived. Not that month. Not the next. Not ever. I checked with Maria twice more, politely, in writing, because an accountant learns to confirm before she concludes. The hospital that opened my daughter's chest and sewed her back together had been used as a stage prop, and the applause had been banked, was still being banked, in shares and likes and Derek's smiling headshot, while the actual check stayed imaginary. I sat with the binder open to the new tab and understood something that changed the temperature of all of it. Until that night, I had let myself believe my family was merely vain, tacky, hungry, cold in a crisis but basically harmless. Parade people. Parade people still pay the pledge. The parade is the point, but the float has to be real. This was different. Announcing a gift to a children's hospital and pocketing the glory without the giving isn't vanity. It's theft with a soundtrack. And if the loudest, most public, most checkable promise they made was hollow, then the quiet ones, the earmarked funds, the protected money, the entire $112,000 minus my $5, weren't earmarked for anything but them. The question stopped being whether. It became how much, and for what. I tried the honorable road first, and I want that on the record. In mid-June, I sent a formal letter, actual paper, actual stamps, to Derek as organizer and my mother as treasurer, requesting a full accounting of all funds raised in my daughter's name as her mother and legal guardian. Reasonable, documented, polite. What I got back was a summons. My mother called it a family meeting. The table said otherwise. When I walked into her dining room, there were no plates. Just Derek, his wife Rachel looking at her hands, my mother at the head, and a single manila folder squared in front of the empty chair meant for me. I sat. My mother said they were concerned about me. Derek said the word ungrateful while looking sorrowful, which is a real estate skill. The story had been drafted before I arrived. I was overwhelmed. I was fixating on money. I was, my mother's phrase, delivered like a diagnosis. Not thinking clearly since the surgery. And then came the folder. A media release, professionally prepared, granting the Grace Reed Foundation perpetual rights to my daughter's name, image, and, I quote, medical narrative. Perpetual. Her scar, her story, her face on bus benches until further notice, in exchange for, I looked twice. Nothing. Sign it, my mother said. And all of this unpleasantness ends. And here is the part I'm not proud of, but you deserve the truth. I picked up the pen. 34 years of training reached up through my arm. The two old words were already in my mouth, warm as bathwater. It's okay. It's okay. And then, I swear to you, I heard a 7-year-old voice say, but nobody asked me. I put the pen down. My phone buzzed. Cincinnati number. The hospital. I stood up from that table without signing, walked out past my mother's voice, and took the call on the porch of the house I grew up in. It was scheduling. Grace's follow-up echo had come back, and Dr. Okafor wanted to see us. 2 days later, in Cincinnati, she showed me the pictures. The valve repair was holding, that word again, successful. But there was a residual narrowing where the surgeons had worked, and it wasn't improving on its own. The plan was a cardiac catheterization in early January. Not open heart, she was careful to say. A catheter through a vessel, a balloon. 1 or 2 nights in the hospital. Routine for them. But it was still my daughter, still her heart, still an operating room with her name on the schedule, and when the billing coordinator slid the estimate across the desk, $9,400 due as a deposit, our new insurance year, our deductible reset. I understood that this was no longer a story about the past. It was a story with a due date. That night, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Grace was asleep down the hall with her stuffed rabbit and her zipper and her whole unbothered heart. On the table in front of me, the binder, fat now, 3 inches of screenshots and statements and my careful reconciliations. I'd been assembling it the way you build a storm shelter, without admitting what you're waiting for. Time to admit it. I took a black marker and I wrote on the spine, in letters big enough to read across a room, Grace, Everything. Then I opened my laptop, went to the fundraising platform's help center, and found the form I had been circling for weeks. Report misuse of funds. I attached 30 pages. I described the pledge that never arrived, the final 3,000, the foundation, the bus bench. I read it twice, the way I read everything. Then I hit submit. 48 hours later, my brother's name lit up my phone for the first time in a month. He was not busy anymore. The platform did what platforms do when the paperwork is clean. It froze the campaign pending documentation. Every withdrawal stopped. The public page grew a gray banner that said funds were under review, which in a town like ours might as well be a billboard. Derek called 11 times in one afternoon. I counted, because by then I counted everything. I let each one roll to voicemail and listened to the sequence like a weather system moving through. Call 1, the big brother voice. Han, there's been a misunderstanding, call me back. Call 4, the negotiator. Let's keep this in the family, we can figure out a number. Call 9, the victim. You're really going to do this to us? After everything? After everything. I looked around my kitchen for the everything. The group chat, silent for my daughter's surgery, came alive like a stadium. Cousins I hadn't heard from since the ICU suddenly had opinions about loyalty. And then, at 9:40 that night, my mother's voicemail. Just one. She didn't waste calls. She placed them, like stones. Her voice was level, almost kind, which is her most dangerous register. Hannah, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you will not burn this family's name over money. Call your brother. Fix what you broke. I sat on the edge of my bed and played it 3 times, and by the 3rd pass I finally heard it. Heard what had been true my whole life. She hadn't mentioned Grace. Not in the texts in April, not at the dinner table, not now. The money didn't matter to her either, not really. There was only ever one patient in my mother's hospital, one heart she'd spent her life keeping alive. The name. On Sunday, the name went to church. The post went up Sunday afternoon from my mother's account, written in the voice she uses for condolence cards. It never said my name, which was the craft of it. It spoke of a season of trials for our family, of a young mother under terrible strain, of how illness tests everyone, not just the patient. And then the sentence doing all the work, polished like a doorknob. The foundation exists so that every dollar so generously given is protected and properly managed, no matter what pressures any one person may be under. Protected. From me. The mother who had slept in a vinyl chair for 5 nights was reframed, in one church lady paragraph, as the unstable woman the money had to be defended against. It gathered hundreds of reactions before dinner. Praying hands, hearts. Women I'd known since childhood commenting, "God bless you, Linda, you carry so much." She answered each one with a little sprig of gratitude, tending the crop. By Monday it had jumped the fence. A client at my firm asked my boss, delicately, whether I was doing all right. 2 mothers at Grace's swim lessons went quiet in the bleachers when I sat down, the specific quiet of a conversation you were just the subject of. I want to be honest about how effective it was. I had documents. She had a congregation. I had numbers. She had 40 years of casseroles delivered to the right porches at the right funerals. In the economy my mother ran, that's wealth. And she was spending it precisely. I told myself it couldn't touch anything that mattered. My job knew me, my daughter loved me, paper beats performance in the end. I almost believed it. Then, on Wednesday morning, someone knocked on my door, and it wasn't a neighbor. She was polite, mid-30s, lanyard, county badge, a caseworker. There had been a call, she explained, anonymous, expressing concern about a medically fragile child and her mother's capacity to provide appropriate care. She was required to follow up. She was sorry. Could she come in? I stood in my doorway holding the door frame and made myself breathe like an accountant. Then I let her in, because innocent people with binders let them in. She saw a clean house. She saw a medication schedule magnet clipped to the refrigerator, dated and initialed. She saw follow-up appointments in a wall calendar, a stocked pantry, a child's drawings taped at child height. She asked her questions gently and wrote her notes, and weeks later a letter would arrive with the word unfounded, and that would legally be the end of it. But legally is not the only ledger. Because Grace, home that day with a summer cold, had heard the wrong 10 seconds from the top of the stairs, and after the caseworker left I found her sitting on the landing with her rabbit pressed to her chest, and she asked me, "Is the lady going to take me?" I will not write out what that did to me. I sat on the stair below her and told her the truth in 7-year-old terms. No, never. The lady checks on kids and she saw that we're okay. Grace studied me the way she studies things, then delivered her verdict. We're more than okay. I agreed. I tucked her in early, came downstairs and stood in my kitchen not seeing it, feeling something old in me change its state, the way water does. I never found out who made that call, and I have been careful never to claim I know. That night, my phone buzzed. Rachel, my brother's wife. Coffee, not at my house. We met at a diner off the interstate on Thursday, the kind with pie under glass and no one either of us knew. Rachel looked like she hadn't slept since spring. She's been my sister-in-law for 11 years. We were never close, but she'd sent a card to the hospital in April. A real one, with real handwriting, which by Reed standards made her a war hero. For a while she stirred her coffee and made a fence of small talk. Then she stopped and said, "I do the books, you know. For the office. Derek can't run a spreadsheet." She slid a folder across the table, plain manila, and kept 2 fingers on it a moment longer than she needed to. And what was in her face wasn't guilt or drama. It was grief. Inside were bank statements, the foundation's account, May through July, printed at somebody's kitchen printer, slightly crooked. She talked me through them in a bookkeeper's monotone while my coffee went cold. A 5-figure deposit to a lakeside resort. Planning retreat. Attendees 2. Surname both times Reed. Monthly payments on Derek's new truck, coded marketing vehicle. An invoice from a kitchen contractor. Paid in full from foundation funds, memo office renovation. For the office my mother runs from the same kitchen where I learned to say it's okay. Line after line, my daughters donated heart money, walking out the door in work boots. I asked Rachel why. She looked out the window at the parking lot for a while. "Because I sat at that table," she said, "the night they rehearsed what to say about you, and I kept thinking, my kids are watching this. My kids carry this name too." Then she said the sentence I'd carry into every room that came after. "If you use these, use them right. Not to win. Right." She left first. I sat with the folder and the binder side by side, her numbers and mine, interlocking like teeth, and understood that I now held everything required to end this, and that paper on a table ends nothing. Paper is potential. Somebody has to close the circuit and pay whatever the voltage costs. Under the folder's last page, where a business card was paper-clipped, a name I knew. Tess Calloway, Channel 7. If you've ever been called difficult for asking a fair question in your own family, do me a favor and subscribe. This channel is for us, the difficult ones. Because what I did with that folder cost me the only family I had, and I'd do it again. Tess Calloway had a corner desk at Channel 7 and a segment called Follow the Money, which mostly chased contractors who vanished with deck deposits. I emailed the tip line on a Friday. She called me Monday morning before I'd finished my first coffee. We met in a conference room with a view of the parking lot, and I gave her the shape of it. The campaign, the ICU, the texts, the foundation, the pledge that never landed. She listened for 20 minutes without touching her pen, which I learned is what she does when it's real. Notes are for the maybes. When I finished, she was quiet, and then she said the thing that made me trust her. "I did the nice story on your brother in March. Blazer, big check, family is everything. I put that on the air." She tapped the table. "So I own a piece of this." But she was straight with me about the mechanics, and I respected the mechanics, being made of them myself. A story like this needs 3 legs or it doesn't stand. 1. Documents. I had those, 2 families worth of bookkeeping. 2. Independent confirmation. A complaint filed with the State Attorney General's Charitable Law Section, something official her newsroom could cite, not just a sister's arithmetic. Maria had already walked me through where that complaint would go. The form had been sitting open on my laptop for a week, waiting for my nerve. And 3. She looked at me the way you look at someone before you hand them something heavy. A source. On camera. On the record. With a name and a face the audience can weigh. Sources with faces, Hannah, she said. Otherwise it's gossip with graphics. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading, and it wasn't about me at all. Would Grace sit for it? Tess asked it professionally, almost gently, and then the segment producer joining us by speakerphone made it worse by making it practical. Sick kids carry stories, he said. 10 seconds of the girl. The scar, maybe. Tasteful. Nothing exploitative. His actual words. Just enough that people care. I looked at the speakerphone and felt the whole machine for a second. The same hunger that built the gala, wearing a press badge instead of a sash. And I heard myself say no with a steadiness that surprised me. No face, no scar, no bedside. My daughter had been a prop in one production already. I hadn't come this far to book her into a second one with better lighting. The producer's silence had a shrug in it. Tess studied me, and something shifted behind her eyes. Respect, I think, or recognition, but she didn't sugar it. Without the child, the story got harder to sell upstairs. It could run short. It could get bumped for weather. That's the trade. There was one more piece of arithmetic, and she made sure I did it out loud. If the platform confirmed misuse, frozen donations would be refunded to the donors. Every refunded dollar was a dollar that would never reach Grace's bills, never mind that her name had raised it. And once I was on the record, any private settlement from my family, repayment, apology money, whatever guilt might one day produce, was ash. Nobody writes a check to the woman testifying against them. She laid it out flat. If you do this, you likely lose the money. All of it. You know that, right? I told her I balance books for a living. I've never once seen a column where the truth pays retail. She almost smiled. Then July got worse. 3 things arrived that week, in the order calamities prefer: schedule, invoice, threat. The hospital called with Grace's catheterization date, 2nd week of January, pre-op the day before. Then the billing packet followed by mail, the deposit line in bold. $9,400, due by the end of December. I had been saving toward it the way you bail a boat with a coffee cup, and the frozen campaign sat there in its gray banner, $107,000 of strangers' kindness that could no longer reach the child on its own label no matter who won. And then the third envelope. Heavy paper. A law firm's name in the corner. A golf buddy of Derek's, I'd learn. A cease and desist. Should I continue making false and defamatory statements regarding the Grace Reed Foundation, its officers reserved the right to pursue all available remedies. I read it at my kitchen table at midnight, the binder on my left, the bill on my right, the letter squared in the middle like a dare. And I won't pretend it didn't work for a few hours because that's what those letters are for. They're not law, they're weather. A cold front of serif fonts. I looked up what I already half knew and confirmed it twice. Truth is a defense to defamation. It's close to the oldest rule there is. They weren't threatening me because I was lying. They were threatening me because I wasn't. Somewhere past 1 in the morning, I stopped being afraid in the useful direction. I made tea. I updated the binder's index. If they wanted to frighten me, they had mistimed it by about a decade. I'd already been to the bottom of that stairwell. Then headlights swept the kitchen window. A car was pulling into my driveway, my mother's. She came in without knocking, because mothers of her generation considered doorbells a formality for strangers, and she sat at my kitchen table, and for the first time in my adult life, she looked her age. No sash, no church voice. Just Linda Reed, 61, in a cardigan, with her car keys still in her hand like she might need the exit. She saw the binder and didn't ask. Instead, she told me a story I'd only ever had in fragments. When my father died, 9 years back, the life insurance had lapsed, He'd let it go quietly. One of several things he let go quietly. And there was a mortgage and a funeral and 2 grown kids who still needed launching. And she woke up a 60-hour-a-week widow with a casserole schedule. "The church fed us for a year," she said. "You remember the food. You don't remember why it kept coming. It kept coming because of the name I built, because I ironed my funeral dress and smiled for 9 years, Hannah. Reputation is the only pension a woman like me ever had." For one long moment I saw it whole. The girl who married at 20, the widow doing brutal arithmetic in a pew, the woman who learned that being seen to be good was the only currency that never bounced. My mother is not a monster. She is a believer. She believes in the name the way other people believe in God or compound interest, and she fed her granddaughter to it and called that stewardship. Then she reached into her purse and set an envelope on my table. $10,000, cash. "For the procedure," she said. And beside it, the media release, signature line flagged in cheerful yellow. "Take it. Sign. Let us keep what keeps us." I looked at my mother and told her no, as gently as no can be said. At the door she paused, and without turning around she said it again, soft as a prayer this time. "This family runs on its name. The Attorney General's office opens at 8. I was in the parking lot at 7:45 with 2 coffees going cold, and by mid-morning it was done. The complaint to the state's charitable law section ran 40 pages with exhibits. My binder, Rachel's statements, the hospital's confirmation that no pledge was ever received, and at the end of it I signed a sworn affidavit, my name in blue ink under the word true, with a notary's stamp beside it like a wax seal on the old life. There are signatures you can walk back. This wasn't one, and I knew it while the pen was still moving, and my hand stayed level anyway. That afternoon, I sat in a Channel 7 conference room and signed the second document, an on-camera interview agreement with my conditions written into it, initialed by their producer, because I don't do handshakes anymore. No footage of Grace, no photographs of Grace, no hospital bed imagery, no school name, nothing that would let a stranger find my daughter. Tess read my markups and slid them to the producer without comment. He pushed back exactly once. "Without the kid, I might lose the 10 o'clock slot." And I told him, "Then lose it. You get the mother and the math." Tess wrote that down. She said it was the promo, and she wasn't wrong. Then I lifted the gray binder and Rachel's folder out of my tote and set them on the table, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when weight changes hands. Taping was set for Friday. Air date, Tuesday, 10 p.m. standard practice, Tess warned me, meant the station would call my brother and my mother for comment Monday. No ambushes. Real journalism knocks first, which gave my family about 30 hours to do their worst, and me 4 days to hold my nerve. The studio was colder than I expected and brighter than the surface of the sun. They clipped a microphone to my collar, and a young man dusted my forehead and said, "I'd do great." And then it was just Tess, 2 cameras, and the quiet that money costs. She walked me through the numbers first, because we'd agreed the numbers were the spine. 112,000 raised, 5,000 to the child's household, 25,000 pledged to a children's hospital on a stage and never sent, a resort, a truck, a kitchen. I answered like the accountant I am. Then she asked about the night of April 14th, and I did the thing I had practiced not practicing. I took out my phone, opened the family group chat, and read it to the cameras exactly as it was written. "She's out. She's okay. She wants to see you." Then my brother. "Busy. Handle it." Then my mother. "She lived. Stop making her our problem." I read them slowly, the way you read numbers into a deposition, because a thing read slowly cannot be waved away as temper. Tess let the silence sit. Then she asked, "And what did you reply?" And I said, "It's okay." And then I stopped, and something I'd been carrying for 34 years set itself down. "I've been saying that my whole life," I told her. "To my mother, to my brother. It was never okay. I just kept absorbing the cost and calling it love." Tess nodded and didn't fill the moment, and I heard a camera operator swallow. Over the weekend, the station cut a 15-second promo. No names, no faces, just a blurred check and a voiceover. A local feel-good fundraiser. Where did the money really go? Tuesday at 10. And here is the truest sentence in this whole story. My brother shared that promo on his business page. Caption, "Hope it's not my competition." Winking emoji. Monday afternoon, the station's calls went out. One to Derek, one to my mother. Tuesday came anyway. At 6 o'clock Tuesday evening, 4 hours before air, my mother stood on my porch holding a manila envelope thick enough to stop a door. I saw her car from the kitchen window and came out before she could knock. Some conversations don't belong inside a house where a child is coloring. The July heat was leaning on everything. Crickets. My porch light not yet on. She held out the envelope and told me what was in it before I could ask. $40,000. Full repayment, she said. Every cent you say we owe, and then some. Derek is selling the truck. I took a loan against the house. Her voice was doing something I had never heard it do. It was asking. You call that reporter, you tell her you overstated things, and this ends tonight. The foundation dissolves quietly in the fall. The family stays a family. I looked at the envelope, and I am going to be honest with you about that moment, because the honest version is the whole point of this story. I wanted it. It was Grace's deposit and a year of breathing room, and my mother, for the first time in my life, paying a real price to keep me. Every version of me that had ever said it's okay was standing on that porch in a choir. And the price tag was small, wasn't it? One phone call. One more absorbed cost. Grace would never know. The donors would never know. Only I would know, which is how it had always worked. Which is why it had always worked. And I finally saw the machine clearly. My silence was the fuel it ran on, and it would run on it forever. And someday, it would teach my daughter to say it's okay with her own blood. My mother watched me look at the envelope and made her closing argument, the only one she has ever had. This family runs on its name, Hannah. You are about to burn down the only roof we ever had. I said quietly, because quiet was all I had left and all I needed. My daughter is not a name, Mom. Names don't sit in waiting rooms. And I pushed the envelope back across the space between us. Into her hands with my fingertips steady on the paper, feeling the exact weight of everything it cost. Her face came apart, just once, just for a second. You still have 4 hours, I said. You could spend them calling your granddaughter, she still asks about you. My mother walked to her car. No shouting, no slammed door, just the soft click of a sedan closing, which is somehow the loudest sound I know. Through the kitchen window, the oven clock said 9:58. I know how 10 o'clock looked in 3 different rooms, because 2 of them got described to me later in detail, by people who were there. In my living room, lamps off, volume low, Grace asleep down the hall with her rabbit. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, closer to the screen than a grown woman sits, the way you watch weather when the siren's already gone off. Across town, in the church fellowship hall, my mother at her bridge night, 4 card tables, someone's grandson's graduation sheet cake. And in a steakhouse up north, Derek, entertaining clients under a wall-mounted TV he had personally asked the hostess to tune to Channel 7, because his promo-sharing heart genuinely did not know. The segment ran third after a water main break and before weather. Follow the money. Tessa's voice, level as a spirit gauge, over a graphic that built itself line by line. $112,000 in, $5,000 out to the child's family, $25,000 pledged to a children's hospital, pledged on a stage, in a tuxedo, to applause. And, per the hospital, never received. Then the statements Rachel had printed crooked at her kitchen table, rendered in clean broadcast yellow, the resort deposit labeled planning retreat. The truck payments labeled marketing vehicle, the kitchen renovation labeled office. A spokesperson for the state attorney general confirmed an active inquiry. The platform confirmed the campaign was frozen and donors would be refunded. And then, over a still image of 2 gray text bubbles, blown up to fill the screen, my own voice, reading, busy, handle it. And, She lived. Stop making her our problem. In the fellowship hall, they tell me, the room went quiet one table at a time, like windows going dark, until the only sound was the TV and my mother's phone sliding out of her hand onto the carpet. At the steakhouse, a client said, "Derek, isn't that?" And my brother stood up too fast, and his phone went down with a fork. 2 phones, 2 floors, same minute. In my living room, the woman on the screen said, "I've been saying it's okay my whole life. It was never okay." And the woman on the floor watched herself finally mean it. Then I turned off the TV, and the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator, and my phone began to fill like a bathtub. By midnight, 214 unread messages. I didn't read them that night. I read the senders' names, which told the story fine on their own. Cousins who had watched 2 cruel texts land in an ICU and said nothing were suddenly fluent, thumbs blazing. A great aunt, 2 deacons, numbers I didn't recognize, and stitched through the flood, my mother, calling on the hour like a clock striking. I let everyone go to voicemail and listened to them at the kitchen table with the lights off. 10:40. Fury. The burn this family voice. Words like betrayal and ungrateful. A threat about lawyers that had already been spent. 11:30. Damage control. Eerily composed. Phrases assembled for forwarding. Misunderstanding. Out of context. Handling it as a family. And then, 1:14 in the morning, a voice I had never heard come out of my mother in 34 years. Small. Unironed. "Hannah. Please." That was the whole message. I sat with the phone glowing in the dark, and I want to be truthful with you the way I promised to be all along. That one nearly reached me. Rage I was braced for. Please had no precedent. I walked down the hall and stood in my daughter's doorway and listened to her breathe. The deep, even, boring, miraculous breathing of a child whose repaired heart was doing its quiet work in the dark. That sound is what I traded everything for. It holds up. Back in the kitchen, I opened the family group chat one last time, 14 names, the whole roll call of Reeds, the place where I had sent one photograph and learned exactly what my family was. I didn't type a goodbye. There was no version of it that wasn't for them. I pressed leave conversation, and the screen asked if I was sure, and for once in my life, I was. By Wednesday morning, the story had jumped its banks. A national morning show ran 40 seconds of it in their scroll of the day's outrages. 2 big aggregator pages posted the text message graphic, and strangers in other time zones were reading my mother's words to her granddaughter over their cereal. What they saw on the news. Indeed. The consequences arrived not as lightning but as paperwork, which is how consequences really move. Derek's brokerage released a statement containing the phrase, "does not reflect our values," and quietly pulled his listings. The billboard on Route 4 was a mattress ad within a month. The foundation announced its own dissolution before the Attorney General could do it the hard way. To avoid further distraction from Grace's recovery. A sentence I'd frame if irony hung on walls. The Frozen campaign resolved the way Tess had warned me it would. Refunds, processed to donors, every dollar walking back out the same door it came in. I watched the total drain to zero and felt the strangest calm. The money had never once behaved like money around my family. Better it go home clean. And then Thursday, Maria called from the hospital, and there was a smile in her voice she wasn't trying to hide. Donors had been calling the development office all week, refund emails in hand, asking whether there was a way to give so that it would actually reach the girl. There was. There had always been. The cardiac unit's Family Assistance Fund, hospital-administered, audited, applied straight to patient accounts, not 1 cent of it passing through anyone's kitchen. By the following Friday, the fund had received enough, earmarked for Grace's account, to cover the January deposit and the bills behind it, with a cushion left for the family after us. The money came back for my daughter. It just refused to pass through my hands, or my mother's, or anyone's. Good. That was the point. Bonnie, the ICU nurse, I learned much later, was in that donor list twice, once in April, under her own name, and once in July, under tile counter. Grace had her catheterization the second week of January. What they promised is what happened, which is all you can ask of medicine.